Thank you for this great event. The most paradoxical thing is that normally when we think about businesses, we think about profit taking. And peace, when we think about peace, we think about giving, we think about good things. And these two don't go together in our mind. And over the course of about 15 years, interviewing CEOs in places that were really tough, everywhere from Lebanon and Syria to Iraq to Ukraine, what we found is that the companies that were the most successful were also the ones that were actively trying to build those sorts of peaceful outcomes. And the biggest takeaway for us was that when we think about a business doing peace, we often think about it as a check, right? So a business will write some sort of charitable check, and they'll expense it as a CSR expense, put it under the marketing budget, and then put a nice press release out about how they've contributed to peace. And in truth, what we found is that those companies that were actually doing the work on the ground, the work was pretty boring, right? It was employing the right people. It was keeping people paid in spite of currency collapses and in spite of really difficult safety circumstances. It was protecting their people. All those things are very regular parts of operations and of businesses. It's not the big checks that are going to solve those problems. It's the everyday sort of things that companies do that can contribute to peace.
That's super interesting. And for your research, you actually looked at a lot of tangible examples, right? You studied companies in places like Syria or Lebanon during periods of conflict. What are some of the findings that surprised you the most when you looked into them? And what does it tell us about this sort of everyday resilience that you're talking about in times of crisis?
So we're at a Wired event, right? People are always the problem. I think that's what the most unifying thing across all these conflict zones. But people across all of them are also the solution to all of the problems. And that means that as a company, you have to do this very odd thing where you involve more people, even though it's less efficient, in order to be more resilient. So involving more people in different settings, involving people who are different from each other, means that in the Lebanese case, we had a company where they intentionally tried to hire people from different ethnic backgrounds in order that when there was a checkpoint problem, people would be able to get through no matter what. In Syria, we saw that there were certain companies that were able to actively have success in multiple areas, in spite of the fact that they were controlled by different groups, some by the Syrian army, some by rebel groups, and yet they were able to do that because they had such deep community ties across ethnic groups that they were able to still make it work. That kind of thing is built up over years. If you had asked me beforehand, my expectation was the company that had the deepest pockets would be the ones that would be the most successful and would be the one that would contribute the most to peace. And really it was not. It was the companies with the deepest relationships that were the ones that were the most successful.
Many people assume that a business will simply adapt to war. Some more skeptical people would say, well, businesses sometimes profit from war, right? So what do you think are the conditions that we need to have in the ground so that a business can become a force for peace rather than just a beneficiary of this instability?
That's a good question. I think we have this mindset that, oh, well, companies are going to get in there and they're going to make money and they make money from things not going well. And the truth is your margins are always higher in peace. That's true for defense companies, right? Just like it's true for a grocery store. That's hard, though, to conceive of because we sometimes see companies that are making money in conflict zones. And so we think, oh, this is good for them. They must be fueling the conflict. There are some businesses that do, right? So there are war profiteers. Such a thing does exist. But for most companies in most settings, peace is by far the more profitable option. And most companies realize this, especially the bigger they are, the more they realize it. And also the more locally engaged they are, the more they realize it.
What an interesting observation that I never heard before chatting with you, that even defense companies have higher profits of margin under peace. No, because you think that they would benefit from instability, but not necessarily.
It's very weird because what happens is, so let's say your country, let's say your country's gone to war and you're a defense company in that country. Guess what? Your country is not going to allow you to make any profit margins. They're essentially going to nationalize you. Sure. Right, so they're going to turn you into, in the US, we have something called the Defense Production Act. The US government essentially takes you over, cuts your margins to zero, and you operate at cost. That happens in country after country. The other thing that happens is the high margin products that defense companies create are much easier to fund in times of peace. Right? So again, paradoxically, it's much easier to build new weapon systems when you're in a time of peace, because when you're in a time of war, you're much more focused on refilling missile and anti-drone tech, right? So you're not doing new tech. Instead, you're just refilling the things that you had before.
Okay, now let's ground the conversation to Europe a little bit, right? Because in our threshold, we have one ongoing war and one... Is it not ongoing? Not really sure. Well, instability in the Middle East. Let's just put it that way. So as a consequence, Europe is entering this era of defense investment. And so if defense is starting to become this strategic necessity for Europe, where does ethics come into play? And what are the sort of ethical responsibilities you think that defense companies should have beyond simply following the law or the regulation that's in place by the European Union?
I mean, I think the big thing is with law. So in a past life, I was a lawyer, which please don't hold against me. Nobody likes lawyers. Everybody hates lawyers. The law is always slow, right? So the law is always going to take time, bless you, to adjust. There's never going to be a situation where the law is, or there's very rarely going to be a situation where the law is ahead of what the business realities are on the ground. It doesn't move as fast as technology or capital or businesses. What that means is your ethics are going to be expected as a company to fill that gap. So in the defense context, what that means is if you're a company that makes a product, the end user matters, regardless of what the legal restrictions on that are. So for dual-use products, this is particularly meaningful. So if you produce a drone commercially, but that can also be used for military purposes, people are going to ask you, well, has the drone gotten into the wrong hands? Is there a rebel group somewhere that's attached an RPG to your commercially available drone that's hitting tank targets in Northern Africa? They're going to ask those types of questions. There might not be any legal restriction on those sales, and yet there's going to be an expectation that you have the ethics and the values to do that. That's on the consumer side. The flip side of it is your employees probably matter more than your consumers. Yeah. So what we've seen consistently is that there's often a split between a company's stated values and their employees' values. And this leads to all sorts of problems, right? So lower productivity, walkouts. And we've seen this for tech firms, defense firms, but also just what we think of as sort of regular consumer firms as well.
Going back to Europe, I think part of the reason why we're starting to see defense as an autonomy question is that we have a mercurial administration on the other side of the Atlantic. I'm putting it kind of mildly here.
That's nice.
Right? So I think it's dawning upon Europe that, we need our, it was maybe a vulnerability to depend on the US for defense. So we have this current defense push. I'm wondering, from your perspective, do you see this primarily as a security project? Is it an economic project? Or is it ultimately a political project? Is it a combination of the three?
It's a political project. Yeah, it's a political project through and through. We might all be able to agree that we need to increase defense spending, but then where are those assets allocated? So Greece, Poland, and Spain, to give just 3 examples, are going to have very different threat assessments about where they believe that spending should happen. Even within Greece, there might be disagreements about where an anti-drone system should be deployed, right? Should it be deployed on the border with one country or on the border with another country? Should it be donated to a third country? Right? All those dynamics are political questions. So we might agree on the spend, right? The economics problem. We might agree that we need more anti-drone, anti-missile defense. But deployment is a real question, right? Who are the threats? Who's really the problem? What are we defending ourselves from? Those are political questions, right, at core.
You mentioned this term dual use. For those of us that are familiar with defense tech, it's a very popular term, especially in Europe. It essentially means that, you develop a technology that can be used in a defense capability, but it also has another capability. So a drone can be used militarily, can be used for fire detection, for example. I recently heard that Europe has an obsession with that term, almost as if to justify any defense technology, it needs to have a dual-use application. Do you think we're becoming a bit too casual or accustomed with the term? What are your takes on our sort of obsession with it? And are there any risks hidden behind using it so much when we talk about the defense industry?
I'd say the main risk is actually on the commercial side. So companies have the biggest risk. So if you're deciding that one of your products is going to be a dual-use product, you shouldn't do that softly, right? You should be very clear as to why you're doing that and what the implications are. So one of the big implications is it's a customs designation. So what it means is now you're a dual-use product, so your import and exports are going to be restricted for that product. You're going to have regulations you didn't have to deal with before with other products that you produce. You may get government benefits, right? So there's benefits to those production. You may get, bless you, you may get government support for production of that equipment. And yet at the same time, you've got these restrictions on you. You then have consumer problems, right? So you've got problems with consumer perception of particular types of products. You've then got employee problems. Are your employees okay when they signed up to be a commercial drone manufacturing company? Were they okay with the fact that now your drones are going to be bought by the government and sold to Israel, right, which is an allied nation? If your customers or your employees might have a problem with that, you have to think through that before you actually go into the process of labeling a particular product dual use. That's where the real risk is.
You recently wrote on LinkedIn something that I thought was quite contrarian but interesting. You said BYD, Baidu, Alibaba, these are all designated as military-linked companies despite being civilian businesses. So explain to us what you meant by that, and what's the sort of lesson that European technology companies can take from this example?
Sure. So just a few weeks ago, the US, the Pentagon, Department of Defense, or the Department of War now, designated 3 essentially civilian companies, right? So an e-commerce platform, a search engine, and an electric vehicle manufacturer as being linked to the Chinese government, and therefore not being allowed to have any contact with any contractor that does business with the US military. They're fighting this, okay? They're fighting this designation. The idea, though, is that the US in particular, but Europe, I would imagine, is going to start moving in this direction, is looking much harder at who owns every single company. Is something state-owned by a state that's not perceived of as an ally? If that's the case, you're suddenly going to have a problem, right? We saw this already with Huawei devices, right? Huawei technology. So it's not new, but I think the implications of it are a little bit more dire, because if one government starts to do it, governments like to copy each other. So it wouldn't be a big stretch to see that European governments would start to tag certain governments' companies as particularly problematic, meaning they'll have a market access issue, right? Those companies will no longer be able to access those particular places, and it'll happen overnight.
Okay, and last question. We are in Greece. It's a country that has consistently been spending a lot of money on defense, is currently building its own sort of defense tech ecosystem. There's a lot of startups. We covered some of them on our first edition, on our drone deep dive. What's the message you have for a country like Greece, if you could summarize it? You mentioned some things already. Upon building this defense tech industry, having this aspiration, at a good time for defense tech in Europe, what's the sort of warning, a message that you'd like to give to, say, a defense tech founder in the audience?
Yeah. I think first you have to have a very close relationship with your governmental partners. And the second piece of that first piece is you can't trust your governmental partners, right? You can trust them about as much as you can trust your commercial partners. Right? So as much as you would trust your commercial partners, which might be a lot, that's as much as you can trust governmental actors. That's a good and a bad thing, right? So trust takes time. Trust helps you be resilient in difficult circumstances, and yet it cuts both ways. So they also have to be able to trust you. I would say that's 2 parts of one. The second is you have to be extremely careful about who you employ. You have to ask real questions about whether those people have the background, okay, have the experience, normal technical questions, but you also have to ask whether their values actually align with a defense tech company. You'd be surprised at how many people get into defense tech or get hired by a defense tech firm that then realize they are morally opposed to war. That's going to be a bad job for you, right? You got to make sure that the people who are working for you, their values are actually in alignment.
Super insightful, super illuminating. I'm sure you'll agree. Please help me thank John for a really interesting fireside chat.
That's the thing. Thank you.